Miss Bartram's Experiment by Annie S Swan. Miss Bartram was very plain and very unattractive and occasionally very cross. Yet people said she had almost everything in the world she could wish for. Certainly she was rich, and she lived in a splendid house surrounded by acres of grounds, laid out in the most delightful ornamental fashion. But as she herself often said, she had not a living soul in the world to care whether she lived or died, except for the legacies which she was supposed to be going to leave to her various relatives. She had a good many relatives of one kind and another, chiefly cousins, who took a great deal of interest in her because of her money. She did not trouble to make herself agreeable to them, so that perhaps it would have been too much to expect them to care for her, yet she had been very kind to most of them, though they had shown but little gratitude. Miss Bartram had grown a little tired of it all, and one day in December of a certain year, which Miss Bartram's relatives have much cause to remember, a strange idea struck her. She was sitting at one of the long windows of her great drawing-room, looking out upon the lawn, on which the white flakes of the first snowstorm were softly falling, and she felt very miserable and lonely and sad. Christmas was at hand, and it meant little to her but the expenditure of a good deal of extra money in the purchase of Christmas gifts for her large circle of relatives. Then she was expected to ask as many as lived at a convenient distance to dinner at the Cedars on Christmas Day. And somehow Miss Bartram had a feeling that the whole thing was hollow and insincere. She was a rather shrewd, clever old lady, and she did not believe that among all those who shared her bounty there was one who took a real interest in her, or who had any love for her in their hearts. And suddenly a great desire took possession of her to try them, to discover whether among them all there might be one disinterested soul. She got up with a look of quiet exultation on her face, and rang the bell with an undecided hand. "Tell Ringgold I want the carriage in half an hour to drive to Market Baynton," she said sharply. And in half an hour, accordingly, she drove away through the softly falling snow to the county town, which was only 3 miles distant. The carriage, by her order, was stopped at the office of Geoffrey Hendon, the solicitor, in County Square, and Miss Bartram alighted and went in. Geoffrey Hendon was an old friend of hers, and had managed her affairs for years. He knew all she had done for her relatives. He also knew that they did not regard her with either respect or esteem. But he had never hinted at this, nor allowed her to say it even. He was a kindly soul, and he had seen so much of dissension in families that he was forever on the side of peace. "This is rather a bitter day for you to venture out, Miss Bartram," he said cheerily as he set a chair for her near the bright fire. "I feel this weather myself. We are not getting any younger, eh? And old blood feels the frost of years." "Quite true, friend, but I did not notice the weather in my comfortable brougham. Well, it's nearly Christmas again." "I've been expecting a visit from you," said the lawyer with a nod. Miss Bartram had always been in the habit of consulting him about her Christmas distribution. "What's the programme this year?" "Quite a new one, Mr. Hendon," she replied, with a smack of her thin lips, which betrayed a good deal of satisfaction. "I'm not going to bestow any Christmas cheer this year. I am going to seek it." "What do you mean?" asked the lawyer, looking at her with a puzzled air, noting her elation and wondering what was at the bottom of it. Soon she enlightened him. "I'm tired of giving, Mr. Hendon. I'm going to try the blessedness of receiving for a change. Will you help me?" "You'll need to explain yourself first," observed the lawyer with his customary caution. "Well, I'm going out into the world to spend Christmas a poor woman." "How can you do that?" "Oh, I must pretend a little. That's what half the world is doing anyhow. I must say my riches have taken wings. I can't do it, of course, without your assistance." "Do you mean to say you'll tell all your relatives, the Gilmans, the Lees, the Bartrams and the Fawcetts, that you have lost your money, Miss Bartram?" exclaimed the lawyer in amazement. "That's precisely what I do mean, Mr. Hendon. Then I'll find out who are my real friends. You'll not deny that." "You may, but it's a dangerous experiment which you may regret. I should advise you not to try it." "Oh, but my mind is made up, my good man. If you won't help me, promise not to betray me at least." "Oh, I can hold my tongue if you mean that. It's no temptation to me to speak. Are you going to write to them and tell them this odd fabrication?" "Yes, this very night. I'll write to every Gilman, Lees, Fawcett and Bartram among them, telling them that I have had terrible reverses, and that I shall have to turn out of the Cedars. Surely some of them will offer me a home or ask me to spend Christmas at least. Oh, I have no doubt the Gilmans will, seeing you've kept Bertie at Oxford for 2 years, said the lawyer dryly. But it doesn't seem right. It's telling a downright lie, you know, and the Bible says we may not do evil that good may come. Don't you preach to me, Geoffrey Hendon, said the old lady tartly. I am quite willing to answer for my own sins. I think the Gilmans will be all right, and the Bartrams too, for they are my own flesh and blood. I don't expect much from the Lees or Fawcetts, but we'll see. Good day. I'll write those letters tonight and bring the replies to let you see them, though you don't deserve it. The Araminta mines would do, wouldn't it? What for? A convenient pit to sink my gold in for a time, she said, with a twinkle in her eye. It will do as well as anything else, Miss Bartram, said the lawyer. But mind, I neither sanction nor approve of it, and if you get your fingers burnt over it, don't blame me. That's all right, don't you worry over me, said Miss Bartram as she bade him an amiable goodbye. They were friends of a lifetime and had frequent bickerings which scarcely ruffled the good understanding between them. I fear Miss Bartram is getting into her dotage, Ben, observed Mr. Hendon to his son as he watched the carriage out of sight. But the old lady was very lively and as excited over her new idea as a child over its latest toy. That very evening the harrowing epistles to her relatives were written and dispatched, and in due time Mr. Hendon received a second visit from his rich client. As more than a week had passed since the last visit, he had come to the conclusion that she had thought better of it. He gathered something different from her face, however, the moment she entered his room. "Well, I've done it. I found them all out," she said shrilly, almost vindictively. "Now tell me first, have you had a visit from Tom Gilman and George Lees, my nephews?" "They called here one morning, I believe, but I was at Warwick at the assizes." "Well, I had a call from them pretty sharp, I can tell you. Tom was the most upset, and he had the cheek to ask what was the lowest price I would take for the Cedars, and said his wife would call and select what articles I might be disposed to sell cheap." The lawyer tried to conceal his amusement, for he saw that Miss Bartram was feeling hurt and sore. "But what about Christmas? Did any of them offer you the Christmas cheer you wanted?" "Oh, I brought the letters. They'll convince you if nothing else will," said Miss Bartram, fumbling nervously with the silver clasps of her old-fashioned velvet reticule. "There is only one Christian letter in the pack, but it'll do your heart good to read it." "Who wrote it?" "Why, my niece, Nina Bartram, who married John Fawcett against my will. I've never seen her since. Read that, look, and tell me what you think of it." Mr. Hendon took the dainty little envelope from Miss Bartram's hand and perused it from beginning to end. Whitley End, Worcestershire, December the 15th. "Dear Aunt Bartram, we were much upset to receive your letter containing such distressing news. It is very sad for you, but perhaps when everything is wound up you will not be quite so badly off. John has told me to write to you at once and ask you to come to us for Christmas, and as long as you like. Then we can talk everything over. If only you would make a friend of John, dear Aunt, you would never regret it. He is so clever and everybody trusts him. We have prospered beyond our expectations, and as every Christmas you have kindly remembered us, it is our turn to remember you. If you don't like children, I can give you a room where you will scarcely hear their noise, and though I have a new baby, she is so good we scarcely know we have her except for our joy. Now, dear Aunt, don't hesitate, but come at once. John will meet you at Birmingham and bring you out, or will even come all the way to Oldcote if you will let him. If you won't accept our invitation, then we must come to see you. With love and sympathy, your affectionate niece, Nina Fawcett." "The letter of a kind woman and a good woman, Miss Bartram," said the lawyer, "and she is quite right about her husband. I know that John Fawcett is beginning to be known in the iron world. Well then, perhaps you want to read the others just as a wholesome tonic. Mary Gilman says they have no spare room, as the house is filled with Bertie's school friends, and the Bartrams have the measles, and George Lees and his wife are going into Suffolk to spend Christmas with her mother. So it's Stourbridge or nothing." "Oh, I should certainly advise you to go there," said the lawyer heartily. "You've caught the others nicely, and though I can hardly say they don't deserve it, I feel sorry for them." "Sorry for them indeed," quoth the old lady in high scorn. "They'll be sorry for themselves one of these fine days. I shall never forgive Tom Gilman coming sneaking round to see whether he could buy my house cheaply over my head. But he has overreached himself this time. I shall never believe his cry of poverty again." A few days later, Miss Bartram left the Cedars, giving all the servants a holiday, and departed to Birmingham, very plainly attired and carrying but a small quantity of luggage. She was in high glee, but also felt slightly nervous, for it was something of an ordeal to visit on such terms at the house of the niece whose marriage with a working man, as she had termed him, had angered her so deeply. She arrived at New Street about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and popping her head out of the window, she saw the stalwart figure of John Fawcett waiting for her on the platform. She thought him much improved since she had last seen him almost 15 years before. He was a fine, handsome, happy-looking person with a face which at once inspired trust. He caught sight of her presently and came forward, raising his hat. "How do you do, Miss Bartram? I am very glad to see you. Nina would have come too, but the baby was troublesome last night, and I persuaded her to stop and take a rest, so that she would be bright and like herself when you arrived." "You are very kind, John Fawcett, and I have never deserved it at your hands," said the old lady gruffly. He only smiled, carefully assisted her to alight, and took all her numerous wraps on his arm. Very soon he had her comfortably settled in the Stourbridge train, and as the carriage was very full, they got small opportunity of talking during the short journey. When they got to their destination, there was a cab awaiting them, into which John again handed the old lady carefully. "We hope to have a carriage some day, Miss Bartram, but not yet a while. There's a grand opening at our works just now. I only wish I could take it." "What is it?" she asked sharply. "One of the younger partners has died and his share is to be sold. They offered it to me, and I could have had 20 years to pay it in, but I didn't see my way, and Nina thought we should be better plodding along quietly." "No, John, I don't know that. Big ventures pay. How much do they want for it?" "Oh, I shouldn't like to tell you. A matter of 10 or 12,000, I believe." "Well, here we are. It isn't a long drive, and there's Nina at the door." At this the old lady began to tremble violently, and her eyes filled with unwonted tears, for there was nothing but loving kindness and compassion on her niece's sweet face as she came running to meet her. Although she was now the mother of 5 children, she scarcely looked a day older. "Welcome, Aunt Bartram. We are all very glad to see you. Here are all the children ready to tell you so." They all came crowding round her, making quite a little fuss, and yet all so kind and gentle that poor Miss Bartram was almost overcome, and felt like telling them on the spot that she was nothing but a fraud. When Nina took her up to the pretty guest chamber with its bright fire, and showed her what the little hands had done to make it cheerful for her, Lucy's cherished Christmas rose on the dressing table, and Dick's poker work table which she had made for his mother, and of which he was inordinately proud, the lonely old lady felt more and more ashamed, for she had often thought and said hard things of these simple, homely, hard-working people who had thought the world well lost for love, and here they were the true gold after all. Space forbids me to chronicle the events of the next few weeks, or to describe the manner in which Christmas was spent at Whitley End. It was a pretty old-fashioned house, and in the field behind the house there was a glorious duck pond, where the young Fawcetts enjoyed themselves immensely during the frost. They even persuaded Aunt Bartram to try on a pair of skates, and she became astonishingly frivolous and happy, so that often her niece regarded her with amazement. She could scarcely believe this humble-minded, amiable woman, grateful for every small service rendered, to be the same grim, sour, domineering one she had known in her early days. "The uses of adversity have been sweet to Aunt Bartram, John," said Nina to her husband one night after they went upstairs. "She is certainly most amiable, dear," John answered. "Have you thought what is to become of her, if there is so little left as she expected?" "I have thought, of course, that it might be our duty to ask her to remain here," said Nina with a sigh. "But I am so afraid to spoil the children's happiness. You know we have always agreed that we ought to make them as happy as possible now, because of the troubles we cannot bear for them later." "But the children are devoted to her, Nina, and she to them." "Just now, John, but it might be a different matter if she were always here. Then there are all the other relatives. The Gilmans are much better off than we are." "But they won't have her, dear. You heard her say so. Don't forget that she is your aunt, dear, and was kind to you once. Besides, she is a sad, lonely old woman without any friends." "Oh, John, I do think you are the best man in the whole wide world," cried Nina, as she threw her arms round his neck. And to think that she ever dared think you were not good enough for poor little me. I'll speak to her tomorrow." Nina Fawcett slept soundly that night with the happy consciousness of duty shared and a kind act about to be done. Next morning, after John had gone to business and the children were off to school, it being now the second week in January, Nina opened the conversation with the old lady, as she sat contentedly in the most comfortable chair by the fire. "Aunt Bartram," she said, a trifle nervously, "John and I were talking of you last night, and if things should turn out as badly as you expect, we should be very glad if you will come here and make your home with us. We will do our best to make you happy. I don't think you mind the children as I feared you would." Miss Bartram did not speak a word, but Nina saw the large tears coursing down her cheeks. "I have not deserved this from you, Nina," she said at length. "I can't think what you and John are made of. You certainly are too good for this world." "Oh dear no," said Nina brightly. "Only very ordinary folk. Well, shall we say it's settled? And you can have the room in the south gable you like so much. And while you are gone back to Oldcote to gather your things together, I shall have it nicely papered and painted for you. I am going away tomorrow, Nina, but don't do anything to the south room until you hear from me. Though I should never come to occupy it permanently, I shall always regard it as mine. I have uttered a great many grateful prayers in it." Nina wiped her eyes and, coming to her aunt's side, kissed her affectionately. Next day Miss Bartram insisted on departing, and everybody was sorry, even the servants, to whom, forgetting for a moment the role she was playing, she presented a sovereign each. She promised to write without fail the next day, and accordingly, on the second morning the letter came, addressed, somewhat to Nina's surprise, to her husband instead of herself. "She is trying to make up to you, John," she said, nodding brightly across the table. "Never mind, I am not a bit jealous." John opened the letter, which did not appear to be very long, and as he unfolded it, saw a slip of paper which looked uncommonly like a cheque. "I hope the old lady hasn't sent a cheque for her board," he said, with a laugh. But as he unfolded it, his face paled a little. "Why, Nina, what's the meaning of this?" "A cheque for £12,000. Read the letter, John, it will explain. Surely Aunt Bartram can't be quite right in her head." This was the letter to which the family circle listened, in breathless amazement. "The Cedars, Oldcote, January the 4th. My dear, dearest nephew and niece, I have to begin by humbly apologising for playing a trick on you, but it will be easily explained, and I hope forgiven. A lonely, miserable, selfish old woman got it into her head that there were no such things as love or kindness or generosity in this world, and she made up her mind to test the whole matter for herself. So she made pretence that her riches had taken wings and went forth into the world to seek some Christian cheer for herself. Among all those to whom she had tried to be kind in her own grudging, selfish fashion, she found only one family who would show her any consideration, and these she had treated worst of all. Oh, my dears, God bless you for what you have done. You have opened my eyes and made me believe in God again, and in the goodness of my kind. That is a service which can never be paid for, just as I can never, never thank you for your sweet kindness. It has made a different woman of me. If John refuses to accept the money I send, the money to buy the partnership, it will break my heart. It is only anticipating matters a little, for in any case you would have had that at my death. So please write, or come if you can, and tell me you forgive your foolish but happy old aunt, Catherine Bartram." "A fairy tale, mother," said gentle Lucy eagerly. But neither John nor his wife spoke a word. They were afraid to look at each other, their hearts were so full. That very day they went to Oldcote, and everything was settled. Aunt Bartram still lives and divides her time equally between Whitley End and Oldcote. As for the other relatives, they have not heard the ins and outs of the story to this day, but believing Miss Bartram's money affairs to be in a shaky condition, they hold themselves a good deal aloof. Miss Bartram smiles when she thinks how wide they will open their eyes one day. Miss Bartram smiles when she thinks how wide they will open their eyes one day